Welcome to Insight with Moonshadow. I am Moonshadow, an integrative holistic therapist, intuitive shaman, interfaith minister, and evangelist with over 30 years of experience in the healing field in the US as well as internationally. Now, my intention here is to help you connect you to your inner self and you to the world around you. So every week I will intuit and a message will come to me on what the topic should be every single week. So looking at it from that perspective, it tends to be something that's very current. Now, with this week's topic is about the lost art of communication. Because reason why this topic came to me so strongly this week was because we've come to a world in 2016 where everything is a hashtag or a tweet or a Facebook post. Now, I've talked about this before, but when was the last time you actually had a full conversation? I'm talking about a conversation beyond, hi, how are you? Fine, how are you? Something to think about. Now, granted, you may know people that are pretty deep. You may know people that are very conversational, that enjoy talking, enjoy connecting. I've been blessed to know a few people that enjoy communication. Now, that being said, unfortunately, a lot of times we take this for granted because in the hustle and bustle of the world we are in today, we find ourselves not having time, not even having time to have a conversation. Now, I do enjoy a good conversation, especially something that is an intriguing conversation or a conversation I can learn from, a sharing conversation. And a lot of the people that come to this show, I've had some pretty deep conversations with about topics that you normally wouldn't talk about. Topics like, even though I'm not that political, I'm kind of anti-society though, but political conversations about spirituality, religion. Topics like this that normally you wouldn't normally have this conversation with just anybody. And I can honestly say I've had conversations like this with quite a few people, and it was a welcome conversation because they had a point of view as well. So it makes it different to have the vulnerability to be able to speak your mind and not be criticized and not be judged and actually be heard. Not in the way someone's waiting to respond to you before you even finish your sentence, but they're actually listening to what you have to say. They're actually listening to the articulation, your vocal tone, all those things. And this is why it's called, this topic today is the lost art of conversation and communication. People aren't doing this as much anymore. And that's why I felt a need to speak about. There are people that split up. There are people that get into arguments, get into conflict over text. Now, this is unfortunate, and I'm guilty of texting the sentence, "This is not a text conversation." Now, why would I say that? Because it's very, very easy to be multitasking, doing like 3, 4, 5 things, not really being engaged in the conversation, and then misunderstanding or misinterpreting the tone, or what someone is saying. I have found this to happen even with people I actually knew and knew well. So, looking at it from that perspective, this is something that, with a little bit more of mindfulness and thinking of how do I put myself out there? How are people receiving me? What am I accountable for? In doing that, you will find that conversation in this day and age may be even more difficult. Here's a little experiment. Next time someone says, "How are you?" Tell them shitty. Or think of another word other than fine, how are you? Now, I can guarantee that either if they say fine, how are you, they weren't listening. That's interesting, right? But also, too, if they were listening. And welcome, welcome. We have Miss Ariel. Welcome. Welcome to the broadcast. So now, if you go ahead and someone says, "Hi, how are you?" and you say, "Actually, kind of shitty today, but things will get better." All of a sudden, they'll do it. They'll shake their head like, "What?" They didn't expect anything other than the automatic response that we have been conditioned to say, which is, "Fine, how are you?" Now, you notice a lot of times when people do that, "Hi, how are you?" "Fine, how are you?" They walk away. Now, you ask me a question, you're walking away. Do you really care how I am? And I can understand sleep deprivation because I haven't. I've exercised sleep deprivation today. But so really looking at that, looking at conversation, looking at how it's done. I can honestly say, and the people that are in the broadcast right now can attest to this. I have had conversations for hours and talking about multiple topics, talking about multiple things, and not always agreeing. Sometimes you agree, sometimes you agree to disagree. But the point of it is, the conversation was still there. It was a meaningful conversation. I've learned something. Even if it was something that I didn't necessarily agree with before, but then I saw that person's point. How often, when was the last time? Now, granted, presently I am single. However, for anyone with a significant other, when was the last time that you gave them a kiss before they went to work? Had a little conversation over coffee? Now, some people have this as a regular practice, and I think that's fantastic. But with the world today, a lot of people don't. I actually knew of a couple of families where the father worked one shift and the mother worked a different shift. So the only time they got to see each other was one day a week. Now, how much conversation can you have with one day a week? So this is one of the very large reasons why the topic of the lost art of conversation and communication has happened. Now, there are different forms of communication, of course. There's verbal and there's nonverbal. There's body language. And all of those things matter. And all of those things are important. Every single one of them. But even the sense of touch, even the sense of conversation where you're driving in traffic and you let someone into traffic, you are more likely to find someone surprised, saying, "Me? You letting me into traffic? What?" As opposed to "thank you" and a nod. Now, this happens to be one of the many things that I find unfortunately disheartening. And this is why I hold on to the small group of people that I connect with. Because they're meaningful, they're mindful, they enjoy communicating in one way, shape, or form. We can talk about many things. Now, also recently, there was a breakdown in communication, which left me mourning. And I still keep a light out for this person to see what's going on. But honestly, this is the real part of it, is with communication, you being your true self. And all of us have shadow sides. All of us have those parts that not too many people know about. But for the most part, if you are who you are, regardless where the venue or medium is, it's a pretty good bet that you're not going to be much different elsewhere. So consistency is important. Working with the flow of life is important. And that seems to be the problem today. There is no consistency. It's squirrel brain mentality right now. And I'm not saying that people aren't there. I'm not saying people aren't out there wanting to have conversations. I believe that they do. But the hustle and bustle of the world today makes it very difficult. Those 15-minute lunches, if you have lunchtime at all, in between work and work, makes it pretty difficult. So this is all really important. Yeah, squirrel. That's right. That's squirrel mentality. I call it the attention span of a fly. Or a puppy attention span. Because what happens? A puppy could be intently on one thing, you throw its toy, and all of a sudden, where'd it go? You know? So this is all a big part of it. So why am I challenging people to actually have a conversation? What can happen with meaningful conversation? I can give you a couple of pointers. Conversation can actually make you friends. You can actually make friends. Wow, imagine that. Not only can you make friends, you may find that special someone. And honestly, I'm well known to be king of the emoji. I'm not going to lie. However, when it comes down to it, meaningful conversation is my jam. Love it. So, in thinking about it from that perspective, isn't it important to know your surroundings? Isn't it important to be aware, not just self-aware, but aware of what's going on? Isn't it important to listen to other people's views so you could learn and share your view so other people can learn? But how can we do this with just hashtags and tweets that were under 150 characters? Now, even I found a workaround with Twitter with utilizing graphics, because you can put a lot more than 140 characters on a graphic. But ultimately, it's just an icebreaker. Because in the long and short of it, having meaningful conversations sitting down with someone over a cup of coffee, taking a walk with someone, not with your phones in your hand, checking Facebook or whatever, checking your social media. I'm actually thinking sitting on a park bench or across a table, drinking coffee and actually listening and talking to someone. I don't see that as often as I used to. And this is why this comes up today. This is why it's so important. And to be fair, before this broadcast, I actually didn't get much sleep today. Why? Because I was in the process of having communication. I was in deep conversation. And also setting up this broadcast here in the new venue. So hopefully, fingers crossed, it will go and we'll be here to stay for a while. But without good conversation, how would we learn? Think about it. People used to be huddled around a radio. This is before cable TV. This is before television, right? They used to be huddled around a radio, listening to a radio show. Now that was high tech back then. Now prior to, let's rewind that a little bit more. Prior to that, before radio, they were huddled around a fire and they would tell stories. And the tribal elders, people not much different than your grandparents, would be telling stories about when they were younger and passing on the oral tradition of your ancestry. Now I can actually say, I know people that don't know their own culture because they've kind of been Americanized, you know. But part of it is the world has been so busy that you lose track. You lose your awareness of who you are, your origin, where you've come from. This is one of the great things about actually conversating, actually conversing with someone, actually having a communication, actually having meaningful dialogue. Because I remember speaking to like veterans, and you want to talk about stories, you want to talk about conversation. There's a wealth of knowledge. Us as a people, in this day and age, we kind of put them away. Like old Christmas ornaments. I can't say I agree with that. But if you actually speak to one of these people, and you are blessed if you still have your grandparents around. You are truly blessed if you can talk to them and ask them about when they were your age or they were teenagers. I unfortunately have lost all my grandparents at this point. So I have the stories that I was given and the stories that are memories to me, the conversations that are memories. But this is the part that's so, this is what's so important about conversation. This is what's so important about communication with other people. There are people that I've met that are just such amazing souls and have such amazing spirit that some are still around. Some of them have drifted off a bit. And I can say, and thank you for that. And Ariel just mentioned, may the grandparents rest in peace. They're quite interesting people for sure. And the stories they had were incredible. But see, this is the whole thing. This is the big part of it too, is that without those big conversations, you don't find connections. And if you don't find connections, then you feel disjointed and you don't feel, not like you need to be part of things, but just being in the tribal mindset. I think all of us in the human archetype that, I think it's human nature to want to belong somehow in some way. So how can we feel like we belong, or how can we feel connected if we don't talk to each other? How can we feel part of a group if we don't communicate? Could 140 characters in a hashtag work? Maybe for a minute. But I have personally seen conversation in a chat go wrong. But luckily, if I knew the people, knew their character, knew their sense of humor, then it wasn't, then I understood. But it takes a lot, though. It takes a lot. Hey, Anna, welcome. So ultimately, if you really, really think about it here, communication isn't just another way of connecting. And a lot of times, if you feel disjointed or disconnected and you feel alone, that changes a lot. That could alter and that can condition you in a totally different way. Even animals that aren't properly weaned and socialized can get difficult. So that makes a big, huge difference. So now this is something to think about. Because even in the chat presently, we have people conversing and saying, "Hey, how you doing? Good to see you. Good morning, good afternoon." There are people from around the world, and we all converge in this little rectangle. And I'm grateful for that. And honestly, there are people that I miss that would love to be here, and they're not. But everyone has their reasons, and everyone has their purpose. And it's something that hopefully, fingers crossed, there'll be more conversation. There'll be more communication. No conflict. Hopefully more understanding. But this is something that we don't, not all of us, and I can't say, I say we, but it's a we understood. As a world, as the majority, less people do it. And I do believe there's a sampling of people that do connect, that do communicate. Why? Because I've met them. People that I found out what they do, what their hobbies are, what their passions are, how many kids they have, what their kids do on a daily basis. There are some people I've never even met in person, but I've watched their children grow and become adults. So that's also interesting as well. Oh, wow. So I'm actually on Facebook as well. This is an interesting experiment. Didn't know I was there as well. That's fantastic. There'll be a quiz. I'm going to want to know about that. So yes, but this is all part of the conversation. This is all part of it, and this is why I don't just film my show. This is why I love this live interaction, because all of you matter. All of you challenge me. All of you inspire me. All of you help me continue to bring interesting topics that are not just every day. They may be some things that we should do every day, but not necessarily think about it every day. So looking at that from that viewpoint, this is so important. I just had a conversation a little bit ago, and this was someone that I connected with quite a bit, and I haven't spoken to him in ages. Isn't it funny how connections work? It was like we spoke yesterday. It was like, hey. And it's nice to have those kind of connections. It's great to have those kind of connections, because when you do have those kind of connections, bring you to a new understanding. Through communication, through conversation, you can go ahead and learn about different cultures. You could learn about history, actual history, the real history, not necessarily history that they wrote or fabricated or bent or twisted, because that's happened too. Some books kind of had stuff omitted. You can fact check that. But without communication and about learning about other people, who they are, how they do things, what happens, what part of the world are they in? Let's just think about this, like Hurricane Matthew, for example, in Florida. There are a lot of people that I know that I am glad to say that they're all safe. Now, clearly, I'm in the East Coast, I'm in the Northeast. But through this artificial rectangle that we call, social media, all those people that I knew and know down there, I found out they're okay and they're all safe. That's the good side to social media. It brings people together. It brings people closer. It can break your heart. It can hurt your feelings. You can misunderstand. But that's all the more reason why getting into real conversation where it makes a difference. Hold out that olive branch. If you must, even though it's hard, forgive them. That was last week's show, by the way. But this is a big part of it. So with communication and with connection, you'll find strength there. You'll find the ability to understand and to cope with what someone's saying. You'll be able to reach out and heal someone's hurt. The power of the word is very, very, very strong. And I actually know of many people that, because of lack of communication and conversation, that their families actually broke up or became dysfunctional from lack of communication, because it's just conflict. But sometimes just a little bit more conversation or a question, or a, why did you say that? Or what did you mean when you said that? Maybe some accountability, maybe some ownership of what you said or what you thought you heard or something, also makes a difference. But how can we do that without communicating? How can we do that without speaking to each other? How can we do that without really getting deep into the heart of the matter? It's beyond, hi, how are you? Fine, how are you? From this point forward, I seriously doubt that you'll ever hear that the same ever again. Because after I start to really look at and study the human condition and human nature, because no different than Jane Goodall was watching the gorillas, a lot of times I would sit in a coffee shop, drawing, drinking, drinking my coffee, trying to be as invisible as possible, and watching lives evolve right there. Like watching television, honestly. Want to talk about reality TV? That was reality life. That was like really interesting lessons there. But that's the whole thing. I learned a lot from that experience. And I did a lot of people watching. So now, looking at things past the face or the mask, asking a deeper question. And of course, this is an interrogation. It's got to be a mutual thing, of course, because you don't want to pry into someone's business when they're clearly not ready for it. And you don't want to pry anyway, because then now it's disrespectful, right? But the whole thing was, when you have a mutual conversation or a mutual communication with someone, you learn all about that person. Sometimes when they don't speak, you learn even more. In those little spots of quiet, those little pregnant pauses, that can also teach you quite a bit, because it's a different kind of communication there. It could be nonverbal. It could be body language. So it's a very interesting challenge for you to maybe find out. Get a little, know a little more about your butcher, your mail person, your doctor. Hey, how are you doing today? But really ask because you want to know, hey, how are you really doing today? And being clear about it. I've been very blessed to meet some amazing people. And it took me a while to learn the gratitude about it, because I myself have been pretty disconnected for some time, busy watching from the outside and not participating as much as I should. But I learned that that disconnect was doing more harm than good. So for all you antisocial people out there, have a conversation. You know, break that frown, smile a little, think outside the box, go by the beat of a different drummer. Try it. You just might like it. Because you never know. That next person you meet might become your best friend. That person you may meet may be your partner in crime, may be a business associate. And if you're lucky, that person just may be that special someone. But how do you know if you don't have a conversation? How do you know if you don't take a risk? How do you know if you don't say, hi, how are you today? So I guess part of this is about taking risks. It is, because there's a sense of vulnerability. There's a sense of intimacy there when you have a conversation with someone, especially when you get some deep, deep stuff. Who are you voting for? Well, that's a big one. That's a loaded question in this time. At this point in the world today, that's a pretty loaded question. That can probably bring out a fist fight, depending on who you're voting for. But also, I can say, going back a few months ago, I was broadcasting in a room with a few other people that didn't agree. None of them really agreed. We didn't agree with each other, but we agreed to disagree. And we learned something about everyone else's viewpoint. Not one voice was raised. There was no animosity. And we were talking about politics, and we were talking about religion, and we were talking about really things you don't really talk about upon meeting someone for the first time. And we're talking, this crossed generations. There was a pretty good generation gap because there were different ages in this room at the time. But if you really think about it, if you use both of those ears to listen and the one mouth you have to speak, and you're conscious and aware of it, then wow, you could learn something pretty amazing. So is there any insights or any experiences that you've had? What are your views about conversation? Do you think it should be just a hashtag and just a, hey, how you doing? Just a smile, just a wave, just a nod? Or would you prefer a real conversation? This isn't a trick question. Some people are used to the quick and skinny. The, hey, how are you? The nod, that kind of thing. And here's another, I'll give you another story about communication. And this wasn't, actually, I've got a couple. I can share them. One conversation that happened was completely nonverbal. It was body language, but it was amazing. It was an amazing experience. Now, when I was younger, and I was, always, I'm still a musician, but typical rock and roll musician guy, long hair, the whole nine. I was trying to leave from my neighborhood to go down to Newport because I live on the East Coast, Northeast. Now, needless to say, no one was letting me in at all. Not really typical. It's not really atypical, right? So if you really think about it, even now people cut you off, and it's unfortunate people aren't as polite or courteous as they should be. But hey, I stand corrected. It is what it is. Everyone tends to be different. However, what was happening very close to my house was a huge biker convention. And welcome back, Anna. So this big, huge biker convention. Now, one of the bikers saw that no one was letting me into traffic. So one biker sees this and then pulls his bike out literally to the middle of the road. And the another biker sees what he did and sees the situation, and he moves behind the first biker. Needless to say, what they did was they blocked off the road for me to turn. Now that's pretty powerful stuff, right? It gets better. Upon turning left. Now I was on a bike. I was in a car. I was in my Mustang at the time. I remember beeping my horn and waving out my window. And there was a huge storm of motorcycle horns beckoning out. Now, what's the point of this story? I did not speak with any one of these people, but they saw what was going on, and they helped. Not for any other reason, not for any agenda. They just helped. It was a random act of kindness. They probably thought too that I rode bike, because I did. But the whole point of it is, it was completely nonverbal communication. I felt like I was one with this tribe of people, and they probably didn't know everybody. But the whole point of it was, if it wasn't for some form of communication, some form of connection, I probably would have been waiting there another 10, 15 minutes. So, this is what I'm saying. And that made all the difference. I remember this to this day. And that happened many, many, many moons ago. So ultimately, that one communication that you have, that one conversation that you have at the Dunkin' Donuts or the Krispy Kreme or that fractured prune that you go to, or the bar. That may be the person that saves your life. That may be the doctor that sews you up. Wouldn't it be worth having a good conversation with more people? Like I said, you don't know what could happen. It could be good or bad, right? But it's worth the risk. And also, too, as Anna's saying, the fact of random acts of kindness, you got to love those. And that gives me more hope for humanity. It really does. But also, too, the fact of how people can have a conversation and agree to disagree and learn from each other and all of that as well, that is huge. That's so important. Because prior to the internet, prior to having computers and all these super incredible technological advances, we were learning in schoolhouses. we were learning from, or even more beyond that, we were learning by oral tradition from stories from our own ancestors. And it was being passed down from one generation to the next. We fell short of that in 2016. We're falling short. So this is the whole thing, this is the big deal. Why? Okay, why am I bringing this up? Because it's important. The conversation you have tomorrow may be the one conversation that you needed. It may be that one piece of information that you needed to move forward. It could have been that one thing you needed that could save your life or save someone else's life. I know whenever I learn of new information, I pass that on to other people. I share that information. I share that wisdom. And this is one of the big reasons why I do my show Insight with Moonshadow, for that reason, because I learn from all of you, and I also share my experiences from all of you. I guide and teach and learn. So it's kind of pretty cool stuff, I'd say. It's an interesting experience. And at this point, it's, I believe, episode 38. So I've been doing this for 38 weeks, nonstop, despite platforms dying, despite platforms changing, but we're still here. So I'm going to challenge all of you. Have a random conversation with someone. Because I've met some pretty amazing people by having random conversations. Random conversations in the post office, at the grocery store, at the local coffee shop, at the beach, wherever it is. Have a random conversation. And I think once you do have that random conversation, you'll find you've learned something new. I can almost guarantee it. You can take this to the bank. You may learn, wow, I really shouldn't have had a conversation with that person, because now I know how not to have a conversation. That is possible if you speak with one particular political candidate. I don't know if I'd want to talk to that person. I'm not going to mention names. But I bet I would learn something from the conversation. Probably how not to be, more so than how to be. But it'd still be a learning. It'd still be a lesson. It'd still be information, one way or the other. So we're going to be closing it up shortly. But is there something you would like to share, an experience that you had? What are your views about conversation? What do you think? Does conversation matter? Now, Anna's saying more often than not, once you get past the awkward newness, people are pretty decent overall. I agree with that. Because I'll tell you, there are people that I thought weren't very nice. People that I would almost judge and almost criticize. Why? Because they seemed kind of sketchy. But then, after learning, I'm not that young, and giving them the opportunity to speak a little more, I found that they are actually misunderstood people. Getting to know a little more about their brain and how they function, they're actually not as bad or as difficult or what other people say they are. And how quick people criticize without actual communication. So if someone's quiet, and this is something you can take with you. There was a girl that was in school. She was very, very quiet. And a lot of people didn't understand her because she was quiet. She was shy. Now, some people decided to judge her in a snappy kind of way or a snarky kind of way, and they thought that she was a bitch. But guess what? She just didn't feel comfortable. Well, I got a chance to talk to her, and she was incredibly intelligent and really a really nice person. Now let's fast forward 10 years. I'm at the class reunion, my 10-year class reunion, and I run into the same person. And it looks like she hasn't aged a bit. Gorgeous. Shiny, just, and having a conversation afterwards, she remembered, as I remembered, and she's like, you actually gave me the time of day. A lot of people just treated me like wallpaper. If I didn't have that conversation with her, I wouldn't have realized how cool she was, how interesting she was, what books she liked to read, what was her favorite hobby, what was her family like. And this is all from starting a conversation. That awkward moment where you just see somebody and you find some kind of connection and you're like, you know what? Something tells me to go talk to that person. Just say hi. And then before you know it, you've been speaking for 2 hours. And yes, Anna, she was a total sweetheart. Kind of makes me kick myself in the ass that I didn't ask her out in high school, to be honest. Because she was a looker back then too. People just didn't realize it. She just happened to be a little more subtle. Not a lot of makeup, that kind of stuff. But again, without that conversation, then what would happen? I would have never known. I might fall into the same trap as other people judging her. So these stories and situations and experiences that we all have, I'm hoping that this kind of brings you around, brings you back full circle, challenges you a little bit to have a conversation with someone a new person you may not know. Allow an organic connection, a natural connection. Because like I said, that person may be your best friend. That person may be all kinds of things. You don't know. Why not give it a shot? Why not take the risk? I think it's worth it. And I say that taking risks and getting my heart broken by friends and lover included. So were there regrets? No. Because it was worth the experience. I'd rather have taken the risk than not. So yes, and Anna's saying, have a center to return to if it goes bumpy. And I agree. It's always good to kind of gain a balance, gain a center, ground, gain a grounding within yourself. And I appreciate that. You guys are awesome. I have a lot of love and respect for you guys as well. So now, just a quick recap. Why don't conversations, why don't conversations actually work? Why don't they work? Why don't they happen? Well, in the hustle and bustle we have today, we're too busy. We're always too busy. We're too busy to have a conversation. We're too busy to do everything. We got to be 18 hours. We need to be 18 hours doing something. And then you ask that person what they did for the last 18 hours. They don't even remember. Right? And Anna's saying 17 hours on a chat is a good way to learn about somebody. And I agree. I've clocked many an hour, many a conversation on getting to know a lot of people that come here and see me every week. So that being said, that's why I have no choice. I have no choice but to say how much I respect and appreciate, because I've learned about a lot of you. Yep. And then Anna's saying fear, anger, judging, and yeah, too busy to open up. Oh, I'm too busy. I got things to do, places to go. I'm in a hurry. Where are you in a hurry? Where are you in a hurry to go? I don't know, but I'm late. What are you late for? I don't know, but I have to be somewhere. I'm like, okay. Fantastic. So again, I just challenge you to have a conversation. Connect with someone you don't normally wouldn't think. Someone you wouldn't normally talk to. There are people that you can have conversations with that you can learn a lot from. People much older than you. And children. People much younger than you. And yes, I even speak to animals. I do. Because they communicate too. I think I almost sounded like a Dr. Seuss for a second. So yeah. Open up. Take the risk. Take the leap. Have that conversation. Learn about someone. Learn about a new culture. Learn about people's views. And there's another thing too, and don't take everything personally, right? One of my last shows were about the 4 agreements. And if you get the chance, look it up. Pretty powerful stuff, the 4 agreements. That's Toltec shamanism. But don't take everything personally if people respond briskly, because you know what? Sometimes they could have had a bad day. Now, giving someone a chance is not necessarily a bad thing. If they prove to be someone you don't want to talk to, then that's fine. But at least you took the risk and had a conversation. At least you tried to turn it around. At least you try to help somebody. Now, again, you don't have to do any of this stuff. You don't have to. I just challenge you to. I dare you to. Because you might find yourself in the middle of an adventure. So think about that. So now, I'm going to close up the show, and I hope that I put a bug in your ear. I hope that you see the world a little differently. That's my intention, my goal. Not just to have you connect further or stronger to yourself, but also to connect the world around you and to have a different viewpoint, to have a takeaway, to take something away from this. It's really, really important stuff. So I want to thank you all for spending time with me here on Insight with Moonshadow. I appreciate you all being here because you inspire me to do this work, whether it be my healing work and my show as well. If you feel guided in any way to connect, and or to support, please follow and subscribe to me on my social media. You can find me on phoenixrisinghealingarts.com or moonphoenixrising.com. So as I say every week, be strong, be amazing, be you. Hope to see you soon.